going to make some almond poppy seed squares. The recipe I'm doing today that I'm going to give you is actually a double recipe, and that'll fit inside a jelly roll pan. And a jelly roll pan is basically a cookie sheet that has the 1-inch side. So this one is a 12 by 17 inch and the 1-inch side. These are ones I think you used to get at Costco. This recipe will fit this. If you don't have this size cookie sheet, you can do half the recipe and put it in a 9 by 13 pan. And just have to make sure you spray the pan, grease it up so that the cake doesn't stick in there. So I'm going to start by putting 4 eggs in my mixer and 3 cups of sugar. So this is gonna make a big batch. I end up making 48 nice size squares out of this. And we're also going to add in 2 1/4 cups of milk and 1 1/2 cups of oil. And I'm going to get this mixing together before I add in the next few things. So I'm going to get that mixing up and I will show you what that looks like. So I've just got those liquids mixing together. That's the egg, sugar, milk, and oil. I'm also going to add in some vanilla extract and almond extract, and I've got the pure of each because they have just a much nicer flavor and aroma on them in them. So my vanilla extract, a lot of the bottles that you get for your extracts, the lids will measure 1 teaspoon, so you can check it out at home. Just double check to make sure yours is actually that. So this bottle from Mexico measures 1 teaspoon in the lid, and also this Watkins one that I have for my almond extract. This measures a teaspoon. Those little tiny bottles that you buy with the little orange lids, they measure a teaspoon. You should check it out. It's actually quite an interesting little fact that I learned many years ago. So we're just going to get our extracts in the mixer as well. It smells so good. That flavor is just awesome in this. And I'm also going to add in 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 1/4 teaspoons baking powder, and 2 tablespoons of poppy seeds. So don't forget, this is making a big batch, so some of these numbers might seem a little high. And the next ingredient we're actually going to add in is the flour, 4 1/2 cups of flour. So I'm just going to add it all in at once. And this is going to bring everything together, because right now just that oil and that milk in there, they're just kind of floating on top of each other, but the flour will bring everything together. So we're going to mix this. And you'll want to scrape the bottom of your pan a few times because you want to make sure that the flour at the very bottom of your mixer is also getting in there. And you want it to all be nice and smooth so you're not going to have big lumps. So we're just going to mix a little bit and you'll see all the little poppy seeds coming out in there. Looks really pretty. I'm just going to stop this and we're going to scrape right to the bottom because I know it's not getting right on the bottom of my pan. So just get right down there and scrape the sides. That flour is building up on the sides. And you can also see that there's some lumps in there right now. So I just want to mix this for a minute or so because I want to just get all those lumps out of there. And I'll show you how that looks once we've had it mixed for a bit. All right, so we've got our batter here. It's like a cake consistency, so you want to make sure there's no lumps in there. And we're going to pour this into our cookie sheet, which is the Costco size 12 by 17 by 1 inch. You need that 1-inch side. And if you don't have this size, you can do half the recipe for the 9 by 13. And you're just going to pour this into your pan, and we're going to bake this in the oven, 350 degrees. I believe it's 25 to 30 minutes. So we will take a look at that when it comes out so that you can see what it looks like. And then when that's all baked up, we're going to also ice it. So stay tuned and I'll show you what this looks like when it comes out of the oven. So my poppy seed squares have been in the oven for 25 minutes, and if you tap on it and it springs back, it's done. Or also if you test with your skewer or toothpick that it comes out clean. And it's lightly brown along the edges, but it's definitely cooked through. If you notice it was soft in the center here yet, put it in for a few more minutes. If you're doing it in the 9 by 13 pan, you might not quite need those 25 minutes because it'll be a bit smaller. We now have to let this cool completely before we're going to ice it. Otherwise the icing is just going to melt. So we'll check back in a little bit once this is cooled off. We're going to make the icing for our almond poppy seed squares. So the recipe calls for 1/3 cup margarine or butter. It's okay to use half a cup. I just don't feel like cutting off and leaving a little piece in my fridge. So I have half a cup of margarine, that's okay. And I have 3 cups of icing sugar. And I'm going to get this mixing in the mixer. And as it's mixing, I'm also going to add in some milk because I want it to get nice and creamy. So I'm going to just mix this for a minute first to get it going, and I'll show you what that looks like. Started, and I'm going to slowly add my milk. I have 3 tablespoons of milk. You may or may not need a touch more. We'll just do the 3 tablespoons first, and I want to just see how this is going to come together before I try adding any more. So we're just going to whip this up for a little bit here, and I'll probably stop the mixer and scrape the bottom to make sure I'm getting all the way to the bottom. It's starting to come together. But I am going to scrape the bottom of my bowl a minute, and I might add a touch of milk yet because it's a little bit thick. So because I used a little bit more butter, I might need a little bit more milk in there. But you want this to be nice and creamy so you can spread it. So we're just going to let this mix up. You want that all nice and smooth. You don't want any lumps in there at all. Yeah, I'm going to add a little bit more milk. So maybe another half a tablespoon or so. Let me just pour a little bit in. Just something close to a tablespoon. You just want it to be nice and whipped up. And I'm going to scrape my sides one more time just with icing sugar in the bottom. Sometimes I find it doesn't quite get all the way, so I just want to make sure there's no big lumps down there because you want this one to be nice and smooth. It's looking good. So I'm just going to whip this for maybe another 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to put it on our squares. Alright, so I've dumped my icing out onto here. It ends up being a fairly thin layer, so you don't want to make it too thick here. So you're just going to spread this over the whole square. And if your icing happens to be a little bit runnier, just let it set up completely before you try to cut the bars and put them in the container. Otherwise they'll just stick together. I also like to, when I put them in a container, put a piece of parchment paper between each layer so that they don't stick so easy. So I'm just going to spread this out, and then I'll also show you how I cut these because I use my dough cutter, my bench scraper for that, which is one of my favorite tools in the kitchen. So let me just finish this up and I'll show you what that looks like. So I've cut up, or I've spread my icing on my squares, and I'm using my bench scraper. This measures 6 inches and my pan is 12 inches by 17. So I find if I usually use my cutter as a marker, I know where my halfway mark is. So you can cut your squares with your bench scraper. I use this for almost all my squares and it fits perfect in here. And then I'm also going to go in half again, and I'll do that all the way down both ways. And then I can also divide this into 3 sections with my scraper, so I can get 48 squares out of here. And at the end of the video, I'll make sure I show a picture as I show when I show the recipe of what these look like. Maybe I can get it. Maybe I'll get one out here already before Juliana stops. Here you go. Nice square with a little bit of icing on it. It's just a very nice recipe. So I'll pull out the recipe here. So don't forget, if you don't have the big pan, make sure you use a 9x13 instead and do half of the recipe. Otherwise, this recipe fits the big cookie sheet and you can get 48 nice size bars like that out of it.